This week on the Communicators, a discussion on FCC policy issues with one of the newest members of the Commission, Mignon Clyburn.
Well, we're pleased to welcome to the Communicators table for the first time Mignon Clyburn, one of the newest members of the Federal Communications Commission. Also joining us is Cecilia Kong of the Washington Post. Commissioner Clyburn, if I could start with a kind of a general philosophical question about communication law. There's a lot of talk and editorials and talk up in Congress as well that communication law is outdated because of all the changes that are going on in the telecommunications world, and it's hard to keep up. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't know if I would use the word outdated, but it's definitely dynamic. I think that we still definitely have a place, but I think that our roles are changing, they're shifting. There are more challenges that we are retrofitting at the FCC, so we recognize that. And there is especially as it relates to regulatory agencies, there is this tendency to have regulatory lag, meaning that how you do business today, sometimes it's hard to keep up with the way the markets are evolving. But you've got a commission, you've got an agency, you've got a chairman who's up to the task, who is forward-looking, and I think this nation and the communications industry is better for it.
Well, just to take one regulation, this is just recently that the Federal Communications Commission, in fact just yesterday, unanimously proposed shifting the goal of the Universal Service Fund to include broadband services so that it's provided and subsidized all around the nation. Is that the first step in getting broadband reclassified from Title I to Title II as a common carrier?
I will not say that it's the first step of doing that. It's a recognition of how the market and how the communications industry is evolving. You've got persons who are cutting the cord. They're about 26% of the nation who no longer they don't use a landline as their primary communications device. So there's a recognition of that. There's a recognition that with companies like Skype, that in terms of how they're communicating, is not just even on their mobile phones. So because of that, we recognize that there is a need for us to shift. There's a need for persons to be connected, especially if they're going to save money, to provide them with more options. So again, this is another example of what you brought up at the top, that there is a need and we have an obligation to keep up, retrofit ourselves, retool, and as we say at the FCC, reboot.
Cecilia Kong.
Sure. I love this word, retrofit. So as you think of retrofitting, retooling, what is your thought on reclassification specifically? Would you support reclassification of broadband services to Title II?
I will say at this point, I have not conclusively come up with, I cannot say yes or no at this time. I can say to you that we have certain goals that we have put forth that are clear in the plan, that are clear with in terms of the net neutrality proceedings that we're passionate about. We're passionate about having an open network. We're passionate about a consumer, when they buy a product, they know exactly what they're getting. They know what speed they're getting. They know what the terms are. So we're passionate about those things. How we do that, how we execute that, how we regulate that, we're in negotiations with the American public and with the companies that we regulate as it relates to that.
Sure. And what's the process right now at the FCC? Are you having conversations with the chairman's office, with other commissioners, the Republican commissioners, on this issue? How are you going through your thought process on how you will conclusively decide what to do with classification of broadband?
The answers are yes, yes, and yes.
Oh, okay.
We are having conversations. We have a series of notices that you know. The one thing about this agency that at first on the outside as a state commissioner, which I was for 11 years, that from our perspective seemed a bit slow, but now that I sit in this chair seems quite logical, is that we have these exchanges. We have a relatively long period of time with a series of notices, whether they're inquiries or rulemakings, that will allow for interactions of ideas, exchanges of ideas, and so in order for us to make the proper decisions. So I have not come in with saying that conclusively saying that we should reclassify or not. But what I will say is the goals that I put forth in terms of having an open platform, all of those, transparency, those things, those are non-negotiable for me. So however we get there, be it through congressional action, because that's a possibility, or be it through some types of negotiation or reclassification, however we get there, I think if we keep consumers, the American public, front and center, that we'll come up with the right decision, the right path.
And do you think that do you have any timeline for when you might come up with a decision with the FCC? Well, the chairman yesterday in the open meeting didn't really expose any more detail as to what any sort of timeline. When do you think, I think the whole telecom community is sort of waiting with bated breath to figure out when are we going to come up with an answer?
I cannot give you a date certain. I can tell you that we are not dragging our feet. I can tell you that all of the things that I brought forth in terms of the interactions, they take time. We want to hear from the public. We want to hear from Congress. We want to hear from the companies. And so however long it takes, I'm not trying to be flippant, but however long it takes to get a robust docket, a robust exchange, then and only then after that, that we'll come up with, I like to call it the proper regulatory gumbo, in order to come up with a decision that is palatable for us all.
Commissioner Clyburn, two questions following up from your answers to Cecilia Kong's questions. Number one, you talked about your service as on the Public Service
Service Commission.
Commission in
Which
South
was a
Carolina.
utility.
Yes.
Regulated entity.
Could you speak a little bit more about the difference between serving on the state level and the federal level and what you've experienced so far?
I will say to you that on the state level, we were closer to the people that we served, that they were front and center. We had evidentiary hearings. That's the biggest difference. So when we had an issue or a docket or a rate hearing or what have you, we had an actual hearing where we took witnesses, including public witnesses. And so you got a feel right then and there about what people were feeling, what they were sensing, what direction they wanted you to go, how they were convincing you. So it wasn't just a paper filing, which sometimes can, from my perspective, because I was at it for 11 years, can sometimes be a little cold. It's exact but cold. We got to hear from the public. And that's the major difference with how the two agencies interacted. And that was a kind of a cultural shock for me, to be honest with you.
Do you feel a little isolated as an FCC commissioner? Is that a fair word?
The first couple of months, I will confess that I did feel like I was on this big 8th floor island. And it was definitely an adjustment for me. But, it's okay. You find a way. One of the ways that we think we distinguished ourselves was we didn't take any meetings for the first month when I was here, because I wanted to speak to the bureaus, kind of get myself, as retooled as possible, and then speaking with the internally, speaking with the bureaus, speaking with the offices, and trying to learn what this new universe was going to look like for me. But then when we took meetings with consumer groups. We took meetings with grassroots organizations. We took meetings with persons from the disabilities communities. We wanted to hear from them first to say, tell me, in terms of the decisions we're making, in terms of this agency, tell me how we can do things better. Tell me what we're doing, what we're not doing, how we're listening, how we're not listening. We thought that that was important. I wanted to hear from them first because I thought that would give me the purest evaluative view about what this new universe I was about to embark on looked like.
The second question I wanted to ask was, you talked about your position on open access being non-negotiable. Right. What are your thoughts then on the recent federal appeals court case regarding Comcast and BitTorrent?
That is a decision that I am not depressed about. Let me tell you why. For to me, there was a certain journalist, not to me,
Me? No.
a certain journalist who pointed out that that decision, in fact, was relatively narrow. It talked about we sanctioned, and that is the word we use, in 2008, for those who might not know, Comcast, for them slowing down traffic for what we call a file sharing entity, which is an entity that provides computer generated or digitally generated services, be it video, audio, or what have you. So this is a aggressive user of bandwidth. So Comcast said, we have a right to regulate our networks, and we were going to slow down this traffic because they are a heavy user. The court told the FCC that we could not, in terms of Comcast, regulate their management practices. That's what they told that. That's I am not an attorney, but it's a narrow decision from my perspective. It does not deter me as it relates to what I brought forth, but it just affirms to us that we cannot regulate the management practices of a company. That's how I interpret it. That's how I interpreted what you, subject to check, what you put forth. And so that narrow interpretation gives me hope for what I put forth.
So Commissioner Clyburn, you've been a big advocate for consumers, and that's something that you and I have talked about for a long time. How does that decision, that Federal Appeals Court decision, impact or affect consumer protection going forward? Because if indeed this narrow interpretation relates to network management and your ability to regulate network management, how does that impact the FCC's ability to protect consumers going forward on net neutrality and in other issues? I mean, it's right. Sort of opened this Pandora's box.
It has. I will say to you that the agency is looking at that, is evaluating the decision, and will act accordingly under the confines. Well, one of the things, and sometimes, when some people might say you lose the battle, don't necessarily lose the war, that practice has ceased. And there are other instances where practices of that nature have been negotiated, have ceased. So there has been a positive effect, I think, for consumers because increasingly there's incentives for these companies to work things out. So while we're still interpreting what it means from how we conduct ourselves, and while it was a decision against the agency, I don't think in practice, as it relates to the public, that it closed the door as it relates to their interactions with these companies. I just don't think that.
Do you think that the companies are able to regulate themselves when it comes to consumer protection? And I'll mention a meeting we had with Bob Quinn, who is in charge of regulatory affairs for AT&T, right. And he said that there are numerous examples of where the industry has changed its practices as a response to how consumers react. And not to say that the onus is on consumers, but I mean, he's saying the onus is sort of on the companies and the consumers. So do you think that that's enough? And that there's maybe not a need for more regulation from the FCC when it comes to consumer protections like net neutrality and rates and ETFs and these types of issues?
One of the things when I hear that I go back to is, and I can't quote it chapter and verse, is the reason why regulatory entities are here in the first place. They're here as a protective tool to the public. They're here because in terms of companies, as much as they want to serve, as much as they want to provide services to the public, that sometimes the principle of making money, of profits, doesn't necessarily work in favor of the public. So you've got regulatory agencies who are there as a protection to the public. I am not the type of regulator who is looking behind every door to regulate every single practice. That is not why that's not why I signed up for the job. I am here to protect the public. Where the markets are imperfect, I am here as a sort of substitute for competition, where there's not competition, because especially as it relates to broadband availability, high-speed broadband availability, most people do not have more than one provider in their market providing truly high-speed broadband internet. If you have that type of scenario, I think part of my mission is to be there as an entity to ensure that you are treated fairly with that, in that case, monopoly for high-speed internet provision. So that's why we're here, not to be this regulator with big arms and saying what we will do, but to be there as a protection, and and those companies know that if things get totally out of whack, that there's an entity with some teeth that will take the necessary actions if things get out of whack. If it is working properly, if the consumers are happy, if the companies are making the money they want to make, if there's a widespread deployment of all of these goods and services that will make our lives better, then I will sit back and smile. If not, I'm there.
Commissioner Clyburn, is the National Broadband Plan, in your view, moving forward in spite of this court case? And does it increase this competition that you call for?
I think it is. I don't know if your viewers could see this, but this is what the rest of the year for us looks like, just as it relates to the National Broadband Plan. We've put forth a set of national priorities, national principles that are reflected in that grid. That I will need I've got my glasses to the side, I will need my glasses to read, I will not do that to you. But what this ambitious, we've got an ambitious next 6 or 8 months ahead of us that will, I think, benefit the public going forward. The things that I mentioned in terms of competition, in terms of openness, in terms of, I did not mention this, but in terms of national security interests, those things are important. Cybersecurity, those are enumerated here.
And those are all part of the broadband plan?
Those are all a part of the plan. This plan, which has gotten praise and criticism, really looks at this nation in total, really looks at how we provision almost everything. Because just think about the communications backbone. The communications, the agency in which I am employed, and I consider myself an employee, a steward of this nation, the entities we regulate are responsible for about 1/6 of this nation's economy. I mean, it helps fuel, just think about, the airwaves, the people who are listening to us, when they pick up a telephone, when they watch cable, when they communicate, this agency has a hand in some form or fashion in that. We recognize that awesome responsibility, and we recognize in the broadband plan that there are certain things that need to be delivered differently. There are certain challenges, be it universal service, because that's enumerated here. There needs to be reform there. The way we communicate is different, as I mentioned, and the way we conduct ourselves in terms of telemedicine, health, all of the things that will help improve our lives. It is, to me, at the foundation of this plan, and it is important and vital, and we're going to be very busy over the next 9 or so months.
This is C-SPAN's Communicators program. Our guest is Mignon Clyburn, Federal Communications Commission Commissioner. Cecilia Kong of the Washington Post is our guest reporter. Next question.
What 2 or 3 items in the broadband plan are non-negotiable in your mind? They must be accomplished for the FCC to be successful.
Universal service reform. The contribution factor is over 15%. That's unsustainable. The way in which we communicate is changing. We have to have 21st century solutions. We've got a 20th century infrastructure as it relates to the current USF regime. That has to change. Public safety, non-negotiable. 9/11 showed us, and I'm from Hurricane Alley. I am from Charleston, South Carolina, and the season starts pretty soon. We have got to have a network, an interoperable network. We've got to have our first responders able to communicate with each other, regardless, without regard for distance, without regard for jurisdiction. Those 2 things are non-negotiable to me. They're at the core of what makes this nation function in terms of communications, in terms of public safety. Those are non-negotiable. We've got to find a way. And yesterday's meeting teed those up. We're going to begin a proceeding on USF reform, and we have a notice of inquiry that talks about cybersecurity. So we knew how important those things were, and those were teed up in our meeting on yesterday.
Commissioner, was there any discussion about the allocations from USF? What should go to broadband, what should go to telephone lines, landlines?
As it relates to what I like the most about this entity is that we're going to have ongoing discussions about that. So however that mix is, that the weight, that factor, one thing that we did bring forth is that the plan that we have in place, whatever the plan, whether the particulars of the plan that we have in place, there will not be an increase of, we're going to work within the framework, the existing financial framework. We will not cause that contribution factor to go up. So that's another non-negotiable.
So could some people, if they have landlines, see a decrease in people who have broadband, see a USF
There's a
contribution?
probability of shifting in terms of the factors, especially as it relates to rural carriers. And those are the types of conversations that we must have. Rural carriers in particular are concerned about the migration of their landline support to this new infrastructure or this system that we're putting forth. Those are the types of details that we're going to have to work out. There are going to be some significant changes and as it relates to contribution factors, as it relates to reimbursement, and we're going to have to make some difficult decisions.
And regarding landline, Century Telephone, Quest merger of yesterday, what does that say about the future of landline services?
That says that there are changes, that there are pushes for scale economies. There's a recognition that it's expensive to support that infrastructure, so you're going to see more of that. I am sometimes weary of consolidations in certain spaces, but I was a business major, and I do recognize that sometimes it really does make sense to consolidate.
I'm going to go at it again because
Okay.
I think I'm going to try a different approach.
Okay.
What is your opinion on the FCC's ability to regulate broadband services? What is your opinion at this point of what the FCC should do?
Again,
What's
I
your
will
thinking?
say,
What
I
is your
understand.
thinking? And I go about it because, you know, I mean, there's an awful lot of discussion going
Right.
on, as you say. So if you can give some texture as to what, do you think that under Title I you can achieve what you want to achieve?
I am hopeful that under the current framework we can achieve what the objectives that I put forth. I am open, however, if we see in our evaluations that there are deficiencies there, or that we're being there are too many challenges there, then we need to have a different set of conversations. I will not prejudge, but I will say that this decision was narrow. I think it was narrow. It talked again about management, you know, how they manage their networks. I am hopeful. I see light behind that door that some people say was all the way shut. I don't think it was all the way shut. How's that for maybe not answering the question?
You showed a little bit more angle. One thing that I found fascinating watching you, Commissioner, since you've taken your position, is how you've used the FCC as sort of, well, a bully pulpit to send letters when you see bad behavior in the wireless industry, for example. So with early termination fees, where does that stand? And do you think that you've achieved what you wanted to achieve? Because I don't think there's been much change. There's been a lot of letters, but...
Well, you know, I don't know if I agree with that wholeheartedly. No one else has, as it relates to those advanced offerings in terms of those what some people call smartphones. You know, there has been some slowdown. There are a couple of companies who have actually lowered their ETFs, and so I think there's been some ripple positive effects of that. I will do my best to maybe not change the world, to influence it. I think we have. I think the proper signals have been sent, and so I'm upbeat. I'm positive.
Commissioner Clyburn, you mentioned public safety.
Yes.
Do you think that the D block should be, the sale of the D block should be devoted to public safety? And have you seen Representative Peter King's new bill on public safety with regard to telecommunications?
I will say that I have not seen the representative's bill as it relates to that space. That's very, you've got two very significant entities who are, some people don't like to use the word trade associations, but I will use it here, of persons in public safety who are advocates for public safety, but do not see it in the same way as to whether or not there should be some private infusion. Those, again, are the types of conversations we need to have. What we want is a network that is viable. However that is achieved, whether it's solely dedicated, whether it's shared, however that achieved is what I think the Commission wants, and I think what the public needs.
And to take this a little further, what do you think about the FCC and its relationship with Congress? And we should note here that, of course, your father is the majority whip of the House of Representatives, James Clyburn.
I have a pretty good relationship with certain members of Congress. I think we've had a few hearings. And I think we're dealing with some difficult issues. So you're going to see some friction, which I think is natural. But I think all in total, it has improved immensely over the past 8 or 9 months. It really has. The exchanges have been relatively friendly. And we are challenged more so on the positions, not necessarily on how we run the agency or how the agency interacts with Congress. Those are positives, and we're going to see more of that. We are faced with some difficult decisions ahead. We have to do more with less, but we've got these things before us that the nation needs, the nation wants. The public has spoken. They want these mobile devices to do almost everything, aside from cook, or maybe some instances cook. And so you've got the public that is clamoring for more. They want efficiencies, and you've got an environment, we think, that again is constantly rebooting themselves to provide that. Congress recognizes that. We recognize that. We recognize that how we get there, it's subject to debate. But at the end of the day, when all of those opinions and all of those variables are being considered, that we think we will come up with the best decision. I'm committed to that, and you've got 4 other persons at the agency who lead the agency who are also. Great.
What would you like your legacy to be? What would you want to be known for after your term? I mean, it's early on still, but what are sort of the themes and issues that you want to own?
I would like it to be said when I say goodbye, as it relates to my service at the FCC, that I was a fierce advocate for consumers, that every decision that I made put consumers first. What's the impact on consumers? Persons who often without a voice or without the means to come into my office every day. I want those voices to be as loud and as clear as those entities who have millions and millions of dollars who are able to have offices in this nation's capital. I think if that were said about me more often, then other things might be said, that I could sleep well and transition and say, job well done.
Yeah, we've got about 2 minutes left. Commissioner Clyburn, what else is on your agenda that we have not talked about?
Telemedicine is important to me. I don't think we talked about it. I might have slipped it in a little bit. I come from a particular area in South Carolina that is I call it it's the everything belt, the stroke belt, the heart attack belt, the diabetes belt. So telemedicine and what we are putting forth from a health initiative standpoint and a national broadband plan, I am passionate about it. I am running away from my doctor right now, but I am constantly trying to monitor and improve my own health via the internet. I think if we can empower persons to augment their outcomes doing just that, then we've done a good job. And of course, that relates to education too. So those things I am passionate about, and we didn't mention.
Final question.
When we talk about consumers, what do you think, where are consumers hurting the most? What area or what issue is hurting consumers the most?
I think when we hear about the challenges and the complaints, it boils down to disclosure. Oftentimes they don't know what they've signed. They go into an office and they are enamored about a device, and they sign up for it with an exchange. They sign a bunch of forms with dozens of pages, and when there's an issue on paragraph such and such, subparagraph so and so, they discover that they have no recourse. It is important to me that the public clearly understands what they're getting. The speeds should be what the speeds are. If they're advertised, they should be what they are. And what you expect from your service should be clearly enumerated. You should know what you're getting when you sign a contract. That's important.
Commissioner Mignon Clyburn, first time at the Communicators table. Thank you.
Hopefully not last.
Hopefully.
Okay.
And Cecilia Kong of the Washington Post.